providing this wonderful venue today. Additionally, very briefly, I'd like to recognize Tarun Chopra, Chair of the Global Chamber BWI Advisory Board, and then invite him to say a brief introduction of Global Chamber BWI.
Thanks, Mijong, and welcome everyone to the Global Chamber event. For today, again, as Mijong mentioned, great thanks to the Basswood Council team for making this happen. Also thanks to Maricel from BLG for coming in and providing us an expert opinion and insights, as well as Francisco from Factum Global, who is joining us remotely to facilitate this session. Global Chamber, as an organization, the mission of Global Chamber is to promote cross-regional, cross-border business, trade, and investments. And as I like to put it, it is about network, learn, and grow. And what you see here today is that learn portion where you're going to get some very deep insights into the business strategies as well as tax incentives from US, Puerto Rico, as well as Latin America. And we've got truly an expert panel to help us deliver that. Again, Global Chamber is present in over 525 metros. And so those of you who are members definitely would find great value in attending those sessions. As well as those who are new to Global Chambers, we want to welcome you, and hopefully you'll join us and enjoy the session. And I want to hand it over to Mijong to take the session.
Thank you very much for sharing that insight with Tom. Thank you. So, we are really convening at a pivotal moment for U.S. Latin America relation as economy and the trade and immigration policies of the Trump administration reshape the really business landscape across the region. Recent policy shift, including tariffs on key trade partners like Mexico, and evolving immigration regulation and changes to U.S. tax law and a growing focus on foreign investment are really creating both challenges and opportunity. Additionally, increasing scrutiny of China's influence in Latin America, particularly in strategic hubs like the Panama Canal, further complicates the evolving dynamic. For businesses and investors, staying ahead of these changes is very important. While Puerto Rico is not technically strictly part of the LATAM, but its cultural and linguistic ties with the LATAM, along with its strategic location on the attractive tax incentives, make it a really vital bridge between the U.S. and LATAM markets. So today we are here really fortunate to have a really panel of expert speakers with deep knowledge in those areas, and then they will share valuable insight into these challenges and opportunities ahead in this shifting landscape, and discuss strategies, right, for successfully navigating and capitalizing on emerging business opportunities. So with that, we will start. Let me first introduce our esteemed speakers. Instead of introducing them one after they speak, I will introduce them all together now so we can move seamlessly through their presentation. First, Chris Kluge, partner and co-founder of Basswood Council, a very highly respected attorney specializing in domestic and international taxation, M&A, and cross-border transactions. Has Magawa, a seasoned corporate attorney and business professional with expertise in venture capital, private equity, and business development, and an active contributor to Maryland Business Support Initiative. Francisco, joining us from Colombia, actually in Latin America today, He's the founder and CEO of Vectum Global, expert in international expansion and market entry strategies with over 2 decades of experience guiding organizations worldwide. And we have Maricel Valentin Marquez. She flew from Puerto Rico to be here in PC to speak in person. She is a managing member at Ballon Logo, specializing in corporate tax law, particularly in mergers and acquisition, tax incentives, and estate planning for high net worth individuals. So please join me in welcoming our incredible panelists. And now we can begin our presentation. Chris, I think you're the first speaker. So
Right. All right. So the title of the presentation is Unlocking Opportunities Between the U.S., Puerto Rico, and LATAM. Now, what I like about this panel is it's not focused on one group of experts as a lot of presentations are. I truly like the cross collaboration, covering consulting to taxes and corporate laws in different areas, because you can't go cross borders and just focus on one aspect. Yes, I should be comprehensive if you're going to do it correctly. So to get started, well, we're going to start with our disclaimer. What it says is you can't trust anything we say up here. And if you do, we're not going to be responsible. Now, just got kind of a typical disclaimer. And then where we're going to go now is into a fact pattern. So kind of to illustrate how we can tie different aspects of a company that's going across borders, we thought it'd be helpful to illustrate with a fact pattern. So I'll read this to you. Med Devices Corporation is a Delaware corporation that manufactures and sells medical devices. MedCorp is looking to expand outside the United States to lower production costs, increase overall profits, and reduce its worldwide effective tax rate. MedCorp is owned equally by 2 unrelated individuals who are citizens of the U.S. and living in Washington, D.C. The owners of MedCorp have heard about opportunities to move some of its manufacturing to Puerto Rico for tax incentives and reduced labor costs. The owners are looking to learn more about how moving certain manufacturing of the medical devices to Puerto Rico can be beneficial to MedCorp. The plan is for MedCorp to form a corporation in Puerto Rico, MedPR, and move $100 million of production of the medical devices to Puerto Rico annually. Of the manufactured medical devices in Puerto Rico, MedPR will sell 60 million of the manufactured devices to MedCorp for sales in the U.S. MedCorp plans to expand sales into Latin America and is looking for guidance on how to best enter the Latin American market. MedCorp plans to sell $25 million annually into Latin America. MedPR will sell the balance of its inventory of 40 million of medical devices into Latin America. The owners of MedCorp are looking for professional representation on how best to structure and implement its expansion. And with that, we'll start with a LATAM overview of Francisco.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you all. Can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm actually right now live from my office, as you can see, at the lounge of the Bogota airport, getting ready to travel to Medellin. So timely conversation to talk about Latin America. And as you all know, we're living in a time of persistent uncertainty. I think when we think about politics, economics, and geopolitical aspects of things, we're all sort of wondering what's going to happen. The new U.S. administration has businesses thinking about what everything means, right, in terms of tariffs, immigration policies, and this whole notion of America First agenda that the president is trying to implement, all of which obviously impact the global supply chain and market strategies for companies not only in the U.S., but also abroad. But rapid change is the constant that we live in, and it's not the first time we're here. I think we've experienced it recently with COVID. We have been through these kinds of situations before, and we have to think about how to proactively diversify risk, identify emerging opportunities, and try to be proactive rather than reactive to this disruption that we're all going through. And Latin America, LATAM, presents a really interesting opportunity, and it's truly a region of strategic importance as you think about doing business in the United States, but also in terms of diversifying that risk. So as companies rethink their global strategies, it's important to think of this region as it is home of a fast-growing consumer market. It presents strategic nearshoring opportunities, and it has abundant natural resources. When you think about what Latin America has to offer, is really critical. It's a really critical part of the world, and is moving forward, being more and more important in the stage of international trade. Especially when I believe strongly that what we're going to start to see in the next couple of years is a move toward a more regionalized supply chain ecosystem. So the question, I think, is no longer should we look at Latin America, but rather how do we best take advantage of the opportunities that are presented in the region. If you can move to the next slide, please. I'd like to discuss a little bit about sort of winners and losers, and I don't think that really there's such a thing as losers, but there are some countries that are not going to benefit as much from what's happening because they're not necessarily poised to do so. But there are some countries that are obviously ready to and have already been taking advantage of a lot of the things that we have been experiencing in the last few years. I think we all know that Mexico has seen a boom in nearshoring due to the US-China tensions of the last several years. A lot of manufacturing and production has moved to Mexico because it's so close to the United States. But Brazil is truly becoming an innovation hub with a very strong agribusiness and fintech sectors. It's producing companies and unicorns that are coming in different sectors, and it's truly an economy that it's sort of its own. As you all know, in Brazil, they don't even speak the same language as most of the countries in Latin America, so you have to look at it slightly different, but it plays a very important role in the rest of the region. Colombia and Chile are two countries that have been sustaining growth for the last several years. They do have, obviously, like every other country, batches on the road, but they're stable investment environments and a couple of countries where companies can really sort of think about how business has been done and not much fluctuation on what's happening. Geopolitics can play a role, but for the most part, these two countries have truly developed business-friendly environments and are two places to take a close look when you're thinking about a regional approach. Costa Rica is a rising player, and they obviously have sort of found their niche in manufacturing and services. Nearshoring is also something that is coming their way. And so as a whole, you know, these countries are really interesting places for you to think about, depending on the organization that you're running, where you want to be. Some countries are facing challenges. Argentina has a new president. Things are changing, things are improving, but it's still very volatile, and the economic stability is still there. Peru has some political uncertainty that is impacting confidence from the investing sector. And we all know, and I don't have it here, but Venezuela, because of political reasons, is truly facing a lot of issues, and it's a place where there's really not a whole lot of opportunity to do international kinds of trade and business from a regional perspective at this point. But let's talk a little bit about, if you can go to the next slide, please, sort of the main industries. And the countries that you see on the slide are not comprehensive, are examples of some of the main players in these different industries. But obviously, I mentioned manufacturing and nearshoring. Anyone who is manufacturing, we're talking about a medical device company manufacturing in Mexico, Brazil, Costa Rica is probably a good opportunity. If you think about energy and renewals, Brazil, Chile, Colombia are probably the best places to start looking at setting operations. In the technology and digital space, Argentina, despite its challenges, alongside with Mexico and Brazil, are poised to provide a lot of opportunities. Uruguay, I don't have it on the slide here, but it's also a place that is very stable from a political perspective, and is trying to become a player in the technology space as well. And when you think agribusiness and food security, almost every country in Latin America has something to do with this, but Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina are truly sort of the leaders in that area in this part of the world. Before I sort of finish, I wanted to touch a little bit on the concept that I introduced a little bit earlier about a regional approach to trade. I think that the new strategy that you're going to be seeing from countries is regionalization. I think as we see protectionist policies increase, businesses will need to build regional supply chains to ensure that they are resilient and competitive in this new environment. And I think Latin America is strategically positioned to be a key regional hub, especially for companies that are either out of North America or companies from other parts of the world, like Europe, that want to continue to do business not only within the US, but take advantage of the massive market that is Latin America. I couldn't leave out Puerto Rico, and we're going to have a full presentation of Puerto Rico, but obviously it stands as a unique case. For those of you that have friends or have visited or have relatives from Puerto Rico, we know that depending on the situation, they are from Latin America or they're part of the US. And so they're really strategically benefiting from that. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to look at how Puerto Rico can play a role in this environment that we're living at this point, because it could definitely be a gateway to Latin America. The culture is very similar, but it is also part of the United States. So it's poised to be a player if they play their cards right in what's happening around the world right now. So before I go, just to mention that and to remind everyone that Latin America is a big player. It should be looked at carefully. My colleague Jeff will talk about later at the end of the presentation about cultural considerations and other types of things. But I think that in general, success depends on understanding the regulatory landscape that we're going to discuss shortly, tax implications, trade policies, but also the local business dynamics, the cultural nuances. Doing business in Latin America is different, and from country to country, it changes quite a bit. So having a Latin America strategy is really not a strategy. You have to think about in every country how you want to target different things and do things. I believe next my colleagues will take now a deeper dive into tariffs, taxes, and the regulatory environment, but thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Say Floyd. All right, so we'll start with the US overview. So it's already been mentioned a little bit, the American First policy. Simple terms, you ignore global affairs and just focus on the US. Generally, you know, protectionist policies are put in place. So, you know, some of the things you see, terrorists threatened on Mexico, terrorists threatened on Canada, China. Right now, 25% tariff on steel. So protectionist policies with a goal of getting more manufacturing or other types of services in the US. And, you know, simply put, tariffs are a tax on goods imported from other countries. You know, I think there's a lot of interest in this right now because there's a lot of uncertainty. So can't really sit up here and say exactly what the tariffs are going to look like 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. So I mean, makes it hard for a business, but it's you know, hopefully there'll be some clarity soon.
Great. So I think as has been articulated before here is that there's this notion of America first. And I think, you know, it's instructive for us all, especially as your global participants, to really think about it that it's not uniquely American, it's America first. We should really be thinking most countries look at this as us first. And that really reflects where the environment we're in today, which is this where you have geopolitics, domestic policy, and business all kind of at an intersection, and really reflects a shift across all those entities where the world is becoming more polarized, you know, going from a unipolar, single unitary order to a multipolar, regionalized as potentially that way, but also very sort of country focused. What about us first, right? And the implications, I think, for global trade is that we think back from the context we're moving out of a globalized world where we, you know, company businesses were built around globalization. And instead of goods moving across borders for bilateral trade, actually being in a world of value chains, right? Supply chains. A company can move goods across the world, across borders within its own company structure. And that has very different implications and optimizations. Where we start to move to this world of looking at goods and trade moving across, we really not have an implication that lines are being drawn, and you really have to have a more thoughtful process around how you structure your supply chain, how will it interact, and the implications, whether it's tariffs, tax policy, or industrial policy, and how it aligns. Now, from our perspective, as a legal corporate team, what that means and what we see in confluence with other societal shifts, the retirement of the baby boomers and the like, and the coming tide of generational wealth transfer, is what we expect is a very active M&A environment, both from, people retiring and moving forward, but as well as companies try to reposition their operations. If you're a producer in Latin America, but you want access to the US market, before it was merely a thought of how do I move my goods across, but now you have to consider establishing certain operations in the US, physical presence, local engagement. And that has implications, whether it's acquiring entity or building. So capital intensity comes across, and you have to be prepared as a business now to look across those things and be able to engage across that. And that has that actually means as well, there's an increased demand for advice, for need to understand local markets, not only about access to them, but establishing in them, operating in them. And we see that process evolving and continuing. For the first time, most people would say the US now is starting to, again, return to industrial policy. What does that mean if you're in the global market? You have an existing market. What does that mean for you participating? What does it mean for those looking to expand other markets? Because in time, those other markets will respond. No one will stay and accept the changing circumstance. They will also respond. So that presents challenges for businesses and for planning that really you can't be reactive. It has to be proactive, looking at that activity. But the implications are quite clear. You will see more investment into physical assets, capital assets, and you'll see corporate transactions picking up. And that really drives, now implicates further, right? What else do we need to understand? What do we need to look at in the world versus that efficiency of, just-in-time inventory management, really having to think about operations and the like. And I think from that perspective, things like tax policy also matter, just alongside something like tariff. And that's really, I think a framing of what is this world looking like and what we have to keep in mind.
Sounds good. How do we stop inflation?
Well, you definitely don't do this.
All right. So I'm just going to give a brief overview on U.S. tax. This topic could, as with all these topics, could take be a whole day course. But when you're looking to, when a company is looking to go outside of the U.S., you kind of want to establish the factual foundation for planning. Where is the company going to have operations? Where are they going to sell goods? Obviously, the goal is to reduce overall U.S. tax, but also reduce tax in the local country. So you can't just focus on the U.S. Can't just focus on the other country. You got to look at the big picture, and you got to understand the aspects of, just because something creates a better tax opportunity in one country, it could be worse overall. So you really want to be looking at the total picture. Obviously, from the U.S. side, to the extent you're paying taxes in another country, you want to be able to take those as foreign tax credits. And when you have a company that has operations in multiple countries, you got to be careful about the movement of cash, if that can create a taxable event. How do we have a chain of entities, parents, subs? We have brothers, sisters. How are they? And all this will have tax implications. And then how do we get the money back to the U.S.? And a lot of the U.S. tax policy under the Trump administration, the first one, was about repatriating profits. A lot of people say, how's the tax policy, income tax policy going to change under Trump this time? They're really just looking to extend some of the things he put into place the first time for 3 or 4 more years. Some of the changes were permanent, but others were going to phase out. And so from an income tax standpoint, I don't think there should be a whole lot of shift, other than him looking to, the administration looking to extend what they put in the first time. And this, I just thought it'd be nice to put a cool diagram up there. But from a tax planning perspective, you're kind of looking in various phases, how does money move around? How do goods transfer from one company to the other? What are their tax implications? You've probably heard of transfer pricing. And so there's a lot of complications, but if goods are being produced in Puerto Rico to then be brought back to the US, both countries want a piece and they want to tax that. And so you got to understand that, you got to put policies in place. And without boring you too much, we'll move on to the main topic of the day. Puerto Rico. And there you go.
Thanks to Francisco for just teeing me up, because like he says, Puerto Rico is very, very unique within the tax and corporate and legal structure of Puerto Rico. Our strategic location makes up a gateway to Latin America, US, and I also think Europe. That's the key, the second one, the US market access. Puerto Rico has a duty-free trade with the US. That honestly has never been reflected on or pointed out in Puerto Rico until now. That could be our key competitive advantage. We have federal funding, we have regulatory alignment with the US. Our banking system, even though it's local, it follows US banking laws, and we have federal legal protections. Also, in the case of our employees, you have to go through the same visa process as in the US, as we are US citizens, so that can impact our labor market. Tax incentives, our uniqueness makes up that for individuals, we're US citizens under the US code, but our corporations are foreign corporations under the US code. So that gives Puerto Rico the availability of doing and providing tax incentives, local tax incentives that were put together on 2019 under Act 60. They had many different laws and they just put it together. Our skilled workforce, I think, is one of our main competitive advantages. You already have an employee who is a US citizen, so no visa for them, who is highly educated and who definitely is bilingual. And for Puerto Rico, wide effect pattern, because we have a strong pharma and biotech industry. As you can see, many of the tax incentives that have been put in place have been definitely being used to develop our pharma sector, and companies like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson. You will see a little map of the companies who are under the tax incentives, and most of them is pharma. So what will happen in Puerto Rico in 2025? Our economy is expected to grow through the reconstruction and infrastructure spending. Those numbers are actual numbers of the federal funds appointed up until January. So if you can see two main things, the FEMA funds and the HUD funds. Of the $89 billion appointed, I want you to see at the amount that has been dispersed. Honestly, the FEMA funds are half of them has been dispersed. If you see the HUD funds, only 20%. So, and those funds were allocated from, I think, in 2017. So it has been a slow process. One of the key things that the new governor ran on is that these funds, especially the HUD funds, would be, their disbursement would be accelerated. So there's money to be spent. Those mostly are under infrastructure and reconstruction. Many companies, not US, I have seen many international LATAM construction groups, because of the scope of the projects, enter Puerto Rico. So this is also the reconstruction and infrastructure spending. I know we are talking about the tax benefit, but this is also an opportunity for international construction companies to come into Puerto Rico and help with those efforts. So reconstruction and spending, as you can see, these numbers are also updated until January 2025. Energy and water. I have for energy, definitely, that's a key issue that US wants for Puerto Rico to address. And they wanted it to be addressed quickly. It has not been addressed as quickly as it can, but definitely that's one of the key points. Not only under the prior local administration, but under this new administration. Water infrastructure, also another key point. For that one, I have seen influx of European companies bidding on those infrastructure projects. So definitely large construction, international construction companies definitely can see an opportunity in Puerto Rico through those projects. Tourism, one of the key sectors for Puerto Rico. Definitely, the cruise industry has not recovered to pre-pandemic numbers, but it's getting there. It's at 88%. Hopefully, it will get to pre-pandemic levels. Hotel demand trends, definitely one key factor that honestly has been a key point for not only hoteliers in Puerto Rico. It's getting that average daily rate up. It's now to $217 a night, and it has increased slightly. Airbnb, definitely that's another sector that is booming in Puerto Rico. And our air traffic, definitely last year, it was a record year for us. 13 million passengers came through our airport. So definitely tourism is something that in Puerto Rico is seeing up and up. There are some projects that are international projects that are coming to Puerto Rico. So definitely that's something that we're banking on, and hopefully that comes.
All right, we'll get this back up in a second.
Okay. What will happen on 2025? It's also, so everybody think it's doing fiscal reform, honestly. So Chris talking about possible US fiscal reform. We are also doing our own version of the fiscal reform. These bullet points are what our new governor ran on. So she the campaign promise was to an overhaul of the tax system. On January 2025, yes, and a committee was appointed to go through our fiscal and our tax code to make it simpler, fairer, equitable. And they are supposed to have suggestions within the first 6 months. So by June, we're supposed to know what the committee put together. What are they going to do? They're supposed to review tax rates. Our individual tax rate is 33%, and our corporate by something called Comodoro Island. So that's not a good list to be on second place. So definitely that's something they're looking to review, and a key things that they are looking to do, which honestly it's very interesting. As you will see, most of the tax benefits are geared not only to corporations or individuals, but are done by activities. So their thought process is maybe to lower that 37.5 corporate rate, but based on activities. So each activity will have a special tax rate. So instead of going through the exemption tax decree process, which could be long, to definitely be more simple and just say, hey, we want to incentivize this industry, just lower the rate. This one, as you will see, definitely elimination of capital gains. That's a big one. And that has been in the Puerto Rican ecosystem. We talked about maybe within five years, and it's gaining traction on the island. So one of the tax benefits that under Act 60 is for persons who relocate to Puerto Rico. So they get benefits, and we will see them on the next slide, for their capital gains, interest, and dividends, but the main focus is on capital gains. So the idea with this, in this reform, is that every Puerto Rican will have no capital gains. So we come from 15% to 0. I think honestly, if they can do this, it will be great for our local economy, for our local capital. So that's under consideration. Global minimum tax, like Chris says, and we will see on the numbers. Puerto Rico hasn't put together yet a strategy on this. And we have to put it together within the next 6 months. Why? Because our economy and our main players are based out of those tax decrees that ran on 4% tax. So not putting together a strategy definitely will affect not only us to see lesser influx of companies, but it will affect our revenue. So global minimum tax is on the radar, and they're supposed to come up with some type of plan to address it. And the inventory tax freeze. This has been one of our main competitive disadvantages. Puerto Rico as a jurisdiction, we compete with the Florida, especially Jacksonville. And one of the things that when companies run the numbers, this is a very local tax, and what they're proposing is a 5-year freeze. But the committee, the tax to the committees to determine how to replace the $273 million of that tax. That has always been the hurdle for this tax to be kept in place. We know it's damaging to our business ecosystem, but we don't know where to replace those if that tax is just eliminated. Okay, so I don't know if you've been able to see. Okay, so this is Act 60, 2019, and I just wanted to say for the record, those laws were not in place on 2019 because that's a fear of people. Oh, they are new. No, these laws were put in place in 1948. So Singapore, strangely enough, took our version of the 1973 incentives. They put it in place, adapted it, and now their economy is doing great. So something happened to Puerto Rico. But what they did in 2019 is just all the different laws, they put it together into the Puerto Rico incentives code. So it's not new, it's not going away. So for individuals, the main tax incentives is for passive income. If you have never been a Puerto Rico resident and you move to Puerto Rico, your interest, dividends, and capital gains will be tax-free. That's one of the key considerations that in Puerto Rico say, hey, if that has increased tax revenues and that's benefit our economy, maybe we should extend that and put Puerto Rican capital and investors on the same steps. So that's one of the key ideas. The other ones are just as I mentioned, we do not incentivize like specific companies. We incentivize activities. So expert services, just doing professional services from Puerto Rico to clients outside Puerto Rico. Manufacturing, that's the bread and butter of Puerto Rico. Medical devices, pharma, trading companies, having your operations in Puerto Rico, but for trade to international markets. Tourism, that's another incentivized activity. Finance, which we had the international financial entities, which was designed to have banking operations in Puerto Rico for clients outside Puerto Rico. For investment, we did a local private equity fund law, which tried to incentivize local projects and local private equity. And insurance, we have an international insurance center law for insuring risks outside Puerto Rico. We have agro industry. We have created industries and films. If you choose Puerto Rico as a film location, You will get tax incentives and infrastructure and green energy. We're trying to incentivize, any green energy project definitely will be incentivized under our tax laws. And for export services, do you know how the regulator starts? They do get their 4% under the export service under creative industry. So I think that's why we have so many starts. So I wanted to give you a map. I took this from my friends in Invest Puerto Rico to see what types of companies are in Puerto Rico, because we talk about the incentives and people think they are maybe for smaller companies, or that they are not valid, or that no. Honestly, it's like the companies that are using these incentives are Pepsi, Pfizer, Medtronic, Honeywell, Baxter, Anthem, Lilly. So big players. So they're big pharma players. So they shouldn't be apprehension on coming to Puerto Rico, establishing your operations in Puerto Rico. So if Johnson & Johnson, if Honeywell doesn't, Bacardi, so if Bacardi has operations in Puerto Rico, so there should not be apprehension, and they have been for years. So that's why I wanted to give you the type of taxpayer, of company who comes under the programs. It's for the good thing about the Puerto Rico tax incentive programs. I think it's not only you can do this type of incentives for big players, but like the services, it can work from a consultant, a one-person consulting firm. They can relocate to Puerto Rico and can help. But I just wanted to show that the players that are involved in our tax incentives. So now that I told you about the incentives, what are the incentives? Well, the exemption period under the new tax code is for 15 years with a possible extension of 15 years. Honestly, I have clients that have been in Puerto Rico for more than 30 years, because you can keep applying in all honesty, but at least 30 years under the code. It's very unlikely that if you apply for an extension, they will deny it. So think about at least 30 years, you have your set tax rate. It's a 4% income tax rate, and there are two important exceptions for these are local taxes, which is a municipal license tax, with municipalities charge like a 0.5%, a half of a percent on gross sales. So they give you that 50%. And remember that I told you that the Puerto Rico government is thinking about the 5-year freeze on inventory. If you go under the tax incentive, you are already have a 75% tax exemption on those taxes, on real property taxes. So that's why our exemption program is so important, and a zero tax on dividends. So if you are under the tax incentives programs and you're in Puerto Rico and living in Puerto Rico and not subject to US, definitely you wouldn't have issues with repatriation, because you would be at 0%. I mean, the important key with this is if your shareholders are not based out of Puerto Rico, the 0% is only in Puerto Rico. That's one of the key things that people think to miss. For PYMEs, these benefits are better within the first 5 years. PYMEs is defined as 3 million or less. We have a 30 or 40% tax credit on construction projects for tourism projects. So example, if you're building a hotel in Puerto Rico, you get tax credits that there is a secondary market in Puerto Rico. So the government offers you those tax credits, 30% of the total project cost, and then you resell them. You must probably get 87 cents to the dollar, but you monetize that. It's like financing, honestly, it's like government financing of the hotel project. So it's a great jurisdiction to do. And R&D credit, we offer a 50% R&D credit under this new code. Research and development this credit was has been made available for all categories of incentives, which is not only pharma. I don't know how that will play out. That's my thing. They have not been put any guidance on what would be research and development for services for tourism, but it's on the law. So let's see what happens. And Chris put together, no, we can go through it together. Computation, honestly, because what's like I like it better when we do calculations. I like the numbers, so people honestly can see what is the actual tax benefits are moving to Puerto Rico. And just also, I was talking to Kristen this morning, and to put in the spotlight for clients, which is my main advice. Like if you're trying to relocate, if you're a US based company trying to relocate to Puerto Rico or to LATAM, you have to run your numbers and you have to collaborate with your US tax attorney. I think for the Puerto Rico tax incentives, I think that's one of the key pieces that US clients fail to do. They get so enamored with the presentation that says 4% and 0% on dividends that they don't think about the US considerations, and then they come back and say, hey, the Puerto Rico tax incentives do not work. My advice is call Chris, run the numbers on the US side first, and then determine if it's worth moving your operations, not only to Puerto Rico, because many of the US international tax laws or tax provisions in the codes will apply even for Puerto Rico or any companies.
Yes. And this is our fault, his laptop powered down. These numbers are from a prior one, but the real savings, you know, like Maricel said, is to run the numbers. The real savings is about $11 million by having some operations move to Puerto Rico, and so it's beneficial. So what we have in this situation is a U.S. parent corp with a Puerto Rican sub, and with the incentives in 1 year they'll save about $11 million. Now jumping, and so that we can move on with the presentation, Hans, you have some quick corporate thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think it's the highlight that's been covered here for Puerto Rico and change with that. It highlights again the decision that companies are having to make and how we would have to attain that in the environment we're in, companies are going to have to think about actual physical movement, acquiring, or what they do strategically. Where do they locate their operations? Especially when we think about the potential for the incentives that are there locally, but then the market access that's provided by being in Puerto Rico, that those goods are now, again, in a place where you can have the duty-free movement. Companies will have to consider that as an access point and how to establish there. So I think that's, this is an example of having certain factors drive the decision of nearshoring or otherwise, how to access the US market and how to leverage the incentives that exist in a third jurisdiction. In this case, Puerto Rico, how do you actually establish that?
Yeah, just to jump back to US tax before we turn it back to Factum, you gotta look at the global picture. You can't just focus on the US. So as Maricel said, 4% sounds great. But if you're a US parent company, the starting point is the same US corporate tax rule. And then there's all these anti-deferral because they don't want funds being parked overseas and saying that it can never be taxed in the US. Trump enlarged that. So there's a category called controlled foreign corporation. And they create within their subpart F income, taxed at 21%. Global intangible low tax income, usually taxed at 10.5%. So the acronym for something is guilty is actually a better tax rate, as funny as that is. And then, as we look at how this is developing, it's not just going to stay in Puerto Rico. We got a whole global scale going here, focused on LATAM. But you got to look at the other countries, figure out where to put sub corporations, where they're going to sell into, what are the tax implications, how to move the cash around. What I really want to point out for Puerto Rico is it's a good solution for companies. The example shows that just that simple example will save $11 million. If those U.S. shareholders actually moved to Puerto, became bona fide residents, and made it brother sister corporations instead of parent sub, then you remove the US tax implications, and then you're really just talking about that 4% tax. There's other things to work out in there, but depending on how serious someone is about not paying tax, a little relocation can do a lot of good.
But how about relocating to a tropical island, Sam? So.
Not like Alaska?
Like, and I think that if I don't mention it, Invest Puerto Rico will tell me. If you manufacture in Puerto Rico, you would have the made in USA logo attached. That's not a tax consideration, but for companies, that would be an important consideration.
Perfect. And I think, is it Jeff now? Oh, sorry.
Yes, hi. Hi, Chris, I was going to congratulate you on your IT skills, but I take that back now. I saw you working really hard, so thank you. And Maria, you know, quality of life is certainly important when you have freezing rain coming down in New York right now. So something also to think about while we're building our hotels with a 40% tax incentive. I guess my role while Francisco is in the air right now, headed from Bogota to Medellin, Colombia, is to sort of bring it all together now and remind everyone listening that, you know, tax incentives are certainly a compelling reason to expand into Puerto Rico or into parts of Latin America, but they're really only one piece of the puzzle. And to truly succeed across Latin America, companies should really think about integrating its tax strategy into a larger market entry plan. So without the benefit of having slides that are prepared, I'll help walk you all through it. Our strategic framework for market entry, we use the acronym PLEE, P-L-E-E, Plan, Localize, Execute, and Evolve. And maybe I'll just go through really quickly in the interest of time here. So plan, you want to develop a clear market entry plan. You want to define your objectives. For instance, this MedCorp, this company that we've been using as a case throughout this webinar, if their aim is for $25 million in annual Latin American sales, they should establish key performing indicators such as market share growth and cost reductions to reach that goal. You should set realistic targets based on your regional studies. So the importance of market research, which I'll get to in just a second. For example, if a market is showing 10% annual growth potential, your goals should reflect that pace, not lower, not certainly greater. Localization, and Maria, I know this is going to resonate with you. You know, adapting your offerings to local tastes and business practices. Puerto Rico is very much part of the United States, but the localization of your offerings is key. And this means going beyond translating your materials. If we think more broadly at Latin America, obviously we know in Brazil, Portuguese is the predominant language, and most of the other countries use Spanish, but they use it differently. So you want to localize your products, services in Mexico differently than you would in Peru or Colombia. In Latin America, local consumers often value personal relationships over these sort of impersonal transactions. The US is unfortunately a very transactional environment. You see this in other parts of the world as well when you travel to Asia or parts of Europe. So adapting your marketing strategies to include local testimonials, culturally relevant messaging, and community engagement. We saw, just quick anecdote, a US-based organization use a Super Bowl analogy in Europe. Well, that fell very flat on its face because they failed to localize their marketing approach. In terms of execution, you know, we recommend implementing a pilot program or a phased rollout. Begin with something smaller, a smaller scale launch to test the waters. Don't go hiring 200 people in the new market right away. Maybe send over a couple of representatives to test the market. In Latin America, maybe launch in a country with favorable conditions like Chile, which has a business-friendly environment. And then you want to monitor performance very closely and very regularly. And use those learnings as you expand into more complex markets like a Colombia or Mexico. And then evolve. You want to establish feedback loops. So the folks that are in the market are your real-time sort of data generators. Use performance data and market feedback from your customers to refine your strategy. This is critical in this region that's very dynamic, as we've been talking about, where consumer behavior and economic conditions are changing, on a daily basis. So for example, you want to review market performance against your KPIs and be ready to make a pivot if you need to. If you notice that maybe digital channels are outperforming your traditional sales channels in a market, then you want to reallocate your resources accordingly so that you can stay on top of your performance. Mijang, okay, we're going to go to the next one, the last one for us, I believe. The do's and don'ts. Okay, here we go. This is sort of the wrap up, and that I'll go very fast because I know time is ticking here. The top do's for successful market entry: conduct deep market research. You don't want to enter a new market without any data that's driving your decision making. And we've had clients that assert that they want to enter Chile, but they don't have any real quantitative or qualitative reason to do that. So look at regional trends. Consider that in this case, healthcare spending in several Latin American countries is expected to grow 5 to 7% annually, and this will directly affect demand. As I mentioned earlier, engage with market research firms or consultants who have market research services like Factum Global, who understand the intricacies of each market. Forge local partnerships. This is not only important across Latin America, but in other parts of the world. In Latin America, business is built on strong personal relationships. Don't think that your deal is going to be signed with one meeting. It often turns into dinner and getting to know each other and introducing each other to their family members, and then business comes up. In Mexico, for example, companies, they invest significant amount of time in relationship building before negotiations even start. So this is hard for Americans to remember. So we need to go in and be patient and trust that process. One actionable tip: set up a local advisory board or a strategic alliance with people who are well respected in the market, and they will help you navigate the market, and it'll give you credibility from more publicly. Invest in localization. We talked a little bit about this, but consider the local consumer behavior and regulatory differences. What works in one market like Colombia may need some adjustment in Chile or Mexico. And then finally, or almost finally, develop a cross-border management team. I sort of got ahead of myself a little bit. Have a few team members in the market. As you grow that team in the market, and they will be able to give you real-time assessments on your performance in that market. And then finally, plan for operational integration. Make sure that technology, your supply chain, your quality control standards are integrated with your home market operation. In closing, I've been given the task of closing this entire webinar. Success in Latin America, or frankly in any other part of the world, is not achieved only by focusing on tax incentives. It requires truly a balanced approach, meticulous planning, local adaptation, careful execution, and continuous evolution. Adaptation is something we talk about a lot. Evolution is something we talk about a lot, which means you have to keep a close eye on your operations to make sure you're pivoting when you need to. And then finally, integrate strategic actions with your tax and regulatory planning to create a robust, adaptable market entry strategy, which is your roadmap that will truly unlock opportunities across Latin America. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. We will have to close online portion because we have a back-to-back meeting. That's what I was told, but I really appreciate all of you being on there. And then we will share these videos and question and answers later on with you all who participated today. It was a great participation. But here in person portion will go over a little bit more with the question and answer. But thank you very much. If it is actually closed off, it's going to move to the different meeting. But I again thank you very much for joining from all of the different places and locations. Thank you. But now